Welcome to the Animal Agenda. I'm Tom Kiesche, and this week we have two guests, director Hendrik Faller and producer Tom Miller, two filmmakers who have a new documentary that they are bringing to festivals and government officials. And well, we're going to find out more. It's titled Dogs Are People Too. And let me get my disclaimers out of the way. I'm speaking as an individual in my own individual capacity, and I was introduced to the film, Hendrik and Tom, by an animal rights lawyer that I've met briefly in the past. Hello, Hendrik and Tom.
Hi there,
Hey,
Tom.
Tom. Nice to meet you.
So, just up front, so everyone knows, we are talking across the great oceans of the world. They are both in London. Do you want to tell us where you're both at right now?
Yeah, I'm actually in central London, calling from the BBC, a place of where I work. Hendrik's actually calling from just outside London in Cambridge.
Perfect.
Yeah, I live a bit more in the country. Tom's more of a city boy.
So, because this movie isn't out and it's not readily available, can you one of you sum up the movie for us and give us an idea of what the movie is about?
Take it away, Hendrik.
Sure. Dogs Are People Too is a film that looks at our relationship with dogs and animals on a wider view, and it does that by looking at several legal cases in which dogs are involved, and in the process of kind of following some of the predominant dog lawyers in the United States, we've uncovered a kind of quasi civil rights movement for dogs that's starting to spread through the United States.
So, what I find really interesting about this, and I'm sure you've been asked about this as well, two blokes that are in England making a movie about dogs in the United States. So, Tom, how did you come about it, or Hendrik, how did you come about that?
Well, Hendrik first started actually. It was a kind of pre-COVID project, and it started, and Hendrik, stop me if I'm wrong, but it kind of started as a kind of cute, cuddly dog film. But then we kind of, as we were researching, there's lots of cute, cuddly dog films out there. So we really needed to kind of find a unique selling point for us and something that was a little bit more interesting than just cute dogs. So as we did more and more research, we came across this piece of new legislation which was being passed through or had been passed through in Connecticut, in which dogs could have legal advocates in a court of law. And that really kind of was a huge kind of thumbs up for us, because then it just opened up into this world of, like Hendrik said, dog lawyers, dogs suing their owners, etc., and it was just then, another year and a half of research trying to find the right contributors, the right characters really for the piece. Trying to find the right dog lawyer for us and the right legal case, which I think was probably one of the biggest issues. Not the biggest issues, but the hardest thing to find, because a lot of the cases we were looking at were settled out of court, and they usually settled quite quickly. But we needed something with a little bit more longevity that would fit into a feature-length documentary.
Yeah, I think what really set us off was that at some point we read that dogs in the United States are technically classified as property, whilst there's 100 million pet dogs in the United States. So in a sense, you could argue that America is like they love the most dog lovingest nation on the planet, and at the same time, they're classified as things. And we thought that doesn't really match up with the passion that we'd found amongst Americans and their dogs, or people and their dogs across the planet. So we thought that was a rich vein to explore.
Yeah, I think the dichotomy of subject matter or opinions on the same subject is throughout the entire film, and it creates an interesting storyline or conflict within the project. So, if I'm hearing it right, Desmond's Law, the law in Connecticut, Maine, that was sort of the hook to the more in-depth, less cute and cuddly film. Is that correct?
Yeah, that was something that we stumbled across, which was a really kind of good pinpoint for us to kind of look at, and as you say, kind of use within the narrative of the film. Yeah.
Yeah, because we were looking for concrete examples. What does it look like when there's a a lawyer in court for a dog, and we'd seen that, I think in the state of California, the dog's best interest can be considered in a custody case, which means that essentially someone has to think of the dog's best interest independently of the two parties that might own him, which kind of makes it more than a thing. And we found other stuff like there was a horse in Oregon that was suing its owner. And there's all these kind of like cases that were very unique and the first in the world. And I think Connecticut was the most concrete example of where there were actually advocates in court representing an animal, not a human or the property of a human.
Watching the film, I wasn't sure where it was going in the beginning, and then it just kept going to different things. The 40 bullets behind a fence, baby cakes. I thought the police shooting animals. I really thought that's where it was going to go, and it would stay in Detroit. And then it just went to other cases. Was there a case that you covered that you just couldn't fit into the film?
Yeah, I mean, probably our favorite omission, which we ended up cutting out, was that really what kickstarts the movement within law to be able to see dogs as more than property was a case involving the Hells Angels in San Jose, California, where a bouncer who was a Hells Angel member killed someone at a nightclub, and that set the San Jose PD off on a massive, basically rampage where they raided every Hells Angels house that they could find in the vicinity, and in the process killed a lot of their dogs to get onto the properties. And they then sued the San Jose PD back as a civil rights case. Almost went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they got something like $2 million in settlement. $1 million of that was for the deaths of 3 dogs, and that was the first time, legally speaking, a dog had been kind of considered as more than property because they found a civil rights loophole. So we explored this case, which happened with a murder at the Pink Poodle strip club, but we had to narrow down our scope a little bit at some point.
Now, it was 2 of you plus a small crew. Do you want to talk about who traveled with you?
Yeah, sure. So it was 3 of us all together. So it was myself, Hendrik, and then we had a DOP, Michael Labor, who it was actually during the time of COVID. So we had to quarantine for 1 week in Barbados. Was it 2 weeks or 10 days or something in Barbados?
2 weeks. The only way we could get into the States was by spending 2 weeks in Barbados first.
Yeah, so obviously
which is where we did pre-production.
Tough going. So we were in 2 weeks in Barbados. Then from there we flew over to New York. From New York, we then flew to Detroit. But the case that we were following, Amy's case, who is our lead character in the piece, whose dog was killed. And the case was actually going to court. So we flew in to Detroit so we could be in court for the hearing. But 2 days before, once we landed in Detroit, the hearing got moved, which completely changed the whole of our filming schedule, which was a nightmare because we were filming for about 2 months in America, and we were traveling it was all by car. We were going from Michigan, Iowa, Colorado, over to California, North Carolina. And so when news came in 2 days before that Amy's case had been postponed by a month, the whole thing had to then be replanned. But yeah, it was 3 of us for 2 months on the road, literally traveling from one side of America to the other and then back again.
During COVID.
It was during COVID, but it was Hendrik, what year was it? 2020. So it was, I think, when things started to get relaxed, when there was a period of time when travel started to become slightly more relaxed. So even though we did all the COVID checks and all the tests and stuff that needed to be done, we could still fly with having COVID passes and all this kind of thing. But it was a logistical nightmare. It was an absolute.
It was 2021. Yeah. Yeah. Basically spent 2 months testing ourselves basically every day because I think I don't know how many people we interviewed for the film. Probably met 30 different contributors. So yeah, it was a bit of a challenge, but we were worried that it was gonna, the film was gonna fall through our fingers because we had already lost another case to COVID because we just couldn't get over, and then the case had been settled. So we had to find a way.
This is the Animal Agenda on KPFK. I'm Tom Kiesche, and we're chatting with two blokes from overseas, director Hendrik Faller and producer Tom Miller, two filmmakers with a documentary titled Dogs Are People Too. The case that you were referring to in New York, that was the dog Diesel, correct?
So that was a case in Detroit, Michigan. It was a lady's dog who bit a postal worker, and in Detroit, and Hendrik, stop me if I'm wrong here in terms of my terminology, yeah, in terms of the legal aspect of it, but when a dog a dog bit the mail worker, and then immediately the dog was taken away by animal control and exterminated. And where we look into that case is that the death of that dog, the extermination of that dog, that shouldn't have happened. It didn't. The process, there was no due process. What's meant to happen is the dog goes into quarantine for, I think, 5 or 10 days, while the case is assessed. And then it's determined whether the dog should be killed or not. And during that process, there is a court hearing, and everyone can give their, opinions, and lawyers can represent them or what have you. But that wasn't the case for this specific issue. The dog was taken away, and within hours, its head was removed and its brain was removed and done in slides, because that's how they test whether a dog gets rabies or not, and that's why they exterminated the dog. So
Yeah,
yeah,
and
that was the case.
just to correct you, Tom, and I think maybe only because it's indicative to maybe our relationship with dogs, the terminology is not exterminate, it's destroy. So legally, you're destroying it because it's a piece of property. Um, but
Yeah, is
also,
that right? Okay.
yeah. But of
No, no, it's
course,
good.
to the woman who lost that dog, whom she considers her child, and not having due process is not okay. So she arrived at court 10 days later, and her dog had already been killed 9 days prior, without her knowing. So a big part of the film kind of explores her relationship to dogs, tries to take apart this case a little bit the way you would in a CSI episode. We try to like look at all the details and do like a bit of procedural work to show people what goes into this, and kind of the madness of that dichotomy that you were pointing out, that we're talking about these animals like they are our children, but you can sign a piece of paper and someone can have that dog killed in seconds and refer to it as destroying it, like a table or a chair. So that's a big heart of the film, I would say, is the kind of through line is that case.
Yeah, I would say so too. And while I was watching it, I was wondering if that was the main case or if that was just a rabbit hole or tangent that you all just went down and found it fascinating. And it sounds
Um,
like it was sort of a case that made itself available to you, and then you just went full in. That's what it sounds like.
yes, yes, I think we went full in. Um, Not specifically because of the case. The case was interesting, but weren't sure whether it would fill a whole film. But the passion of Amy, that main character, that was infectious to us. This like we thought she was great on camera. She was very genuine. Her heart was on her sleeve, and that for us was amazing because we also were aware that all this could be quite dry. Like talk. As interesting as lawyers are, they deal with, legal briefs that are 60 pages long and can be quite dry and all that stuff. So we wanted a real human center and an exploration of a true dog lover.
Well, there was a lot in the movie, as I've alluded to before. I mean, a few things that I really latched on to was the paradox of pet ownership.
Mm.
How some people do look at them as family members, and then the whole abolitionist movement of speciesism and which animals are, worthy of having non-human rights, or I forget the exact term. But I enjoyed the conversation, and the movie didn't seem to give answers, but present a bunch of questions and sides.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And that's what we've experienced at all the film festivals that we've taken it to. And, I think I mentioned it to you before, Tom, that, each Q&A that we've had at all the festivals lasts as long as the film itself. Because and myself and Hendrik often just sit there and don't say anything because we're just letting the audience members argue amongst themselves. Yeah, it's fascinating. And every time I speak to people about the film, and they kind of, pet owners, especially here in the UK, because the culture is very different. And I think in Europe as well, as opposed to America, where, we talk about, dogs being seen as non-human persons, and, people kind of laugh at it. But then when you talk to them about their dog they own and say, well, do you consider it as a family member? They stop and they think, and they say, well, actually, you're right. Yeah, well, I do consider my dog as a family member. So there we go. They've just answered their own kind of, own kind of question, I guess. But yeah, so it's very interesting responses. And of course, where do we stop? So then dogs are now not items of property. Of course, it will go to cats. It already is, I think, as well. When we were looking for cases, there was a lot of cases on cats as well as dogs. But then what about the animals that we breed, we eat, we farm? Where do we stop?
Yeah, it's complicated, and I think what drove me and Tom to do it, really, to start off with, if we're going way back, is we noticed it was a big conversation starter. So back in the day before we'd made the film, I was hosting like these vegan dinners, and Tom is I would say the polar opposite of a vegan, because he's a dairy farmer's son. So he has a very different relationship to meat. But Tom is an extremely curious human being, and he wanted to see, what's a vegan dinner like? And at these dinners is where we brought up this idea that me and him were playing with. And it was always amazing to see that it didn't take very long before we could leave the conversation. It would continue anyway without us. So it would easily take over a dinner party. Sometimes it would anger people, and then they would come back 3 days later and want to have another conversation with me. I found that a lot. So we just thought, maybe here's a way to talk about our relationship with animals without making an animal rights film, but rather to kind of tap into the gateway that dogs give us into the human passion for these animals.
You're listening to The Animal Agenda on KPFK. I'm Tom Kiesche, and we're lucky enough to have Hendrik Fowler and Tom Miller, filmmakers with a documentary called Dogs Are People Too. So let's talk about that pushback, or the conversations that happen after a film festival, which must be fascinating. What's probably the biggest thing people want to talk about?
I mean, there's a lot of people there that do want to see this piece of legislation and dogs being seen as non-human persons. They want to see that worldwide. It does attract a lot of people. I wouldn't say animal rights activists, kind of more vegans, but also, I suppose, not vegans as well. People that just care about animals, But again, it just brings up time and time again in these conversations. You have meat eaters talking about dogs and how they love their dogs so much, and how it should have these rights. But then again, what about the animals they eat? That's what gets thrown back at them, and they can't answer it, or they try to answer it, and it gets quite messy. But I think there's since we've made the film, since we finished filming the piece of legislation in Connecticut, well, not so much having advocates in court, but where they see dogs as human persons. I think that is now being pushed through in Spain, in France. It is creeping into Europe over the last couple of years, I think. Isn't that right, Hendrik?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing expressions of it um, across the globe in different countries and regarding different animals. But I mean, I think one thing I get a lot is I think, yeah, sometimes we split people down the middle. So there's like the vegan crowd who, or the vegan leaning crowd who like this idea of reconsidering our relationship with animals and agriculture and all these things. But then I think there's also the other side who like the film and they understand it, but then they say, "Oh, but I treat my dog better," or I'm a different type of dog owner. And then they take umbrage with, I don't know, the Navy SEAL in the film, for example, or even the main character. But what I like about that is that it doesn't take long before they start questioning their own relationship with their dog, and those lines are actually not that easy to draw to say that's a good dog owner and that person is a bad dog owner. And I think that's what I love about our main character. I think she loves her dogs to bits, but there are people who will take issue with the raising of the dog in question, and some of that situation. But I don't know if they look at it themselves enough.
I'm so glad you mentioned the Navy SEAL because that's the one thing I wanted to really talk to you about. And we don't have to get too deep into it. But I was like, how did this get in this film? And how is that not known more? And that is
Mhm.
someone cloning a dog into dozens of copies of that same dog.
Mhm.
How did you get to that?
Oh man.
Um, Hendrik, you found him, didn't you, before I came along, I think.
I found him. The way I found him is that I think it's been a while, but I think in Texas is one of the main animal cloning companies, and animal cloning is has started more in bull breeding and horse breeding, and then this company brought it into dogs to help people like Barbara Streisand, clone her dogs and those kind of characters because it's like 50 grand to clone and the process is quite awful because I don't know, you lose a lot of dogs in the process of trying to create a clone. So if you want a deeper dive into that, you Google that. It's a pretty dark world. Um, and so I lobbied these people and I wrote them letters and everything because I wanted to speak to them, but they knew better than to talk to me, because they'd already gotten a lot through the situation with Barbara Streisand. But their press dude, for some reason, liked me, and he's like, you know what? Why don't there's another person? Just don't tell anyone I told you, and try out this guy. And because you can't Google him, no one's gonna Google like Navy SEAL clone dogs. Like it would have never occurred to me. And I just got on the phone to this guy, and I loved him. I think he's a highly intelligent character who's surprisingly open, considering that he's a Navy SEAL. It's not what I expected, and we had some weird questions from him for him. We weren't just there to marvel at his dogs. So that was one of my favorite parts of the whole journey, I have to say. That man surprised me a lot, and some people struggle with that section of the film. I think it points directly at the dichotomy and the conflicting nature of our relationship with dogs, because in a sense, cloning is like the ultimate, like it's like saying this dog is one in a million, so I have to clone him. There's no other like this dog, and at the same time saying this dog can be replicated. So it's like the ultimate individual and the ultimate product at the same time.
Well, we are getting to the end. So before we go, I want you to just let people know how they could possibly see the film and what your purpose of making the film is. Who do you want to see the film?
Well, I guess we want everyone, as many people as possible, to see the film. At this year, it was premiered, had its European premiere at the Prague One World Festival, which I think was in April, and then a few months later, it was one of the opening films at the Brooklyn Film Festival. At the moment, it's actually we're setting up screenings in state bars across America. I contacted state bars or animal animal law sections within state bars within the states of America, and they were in the process of screening it there in the hope that it will influence a change in policy for animal law policy. Not saying that it will, but those sections within the law want to do a screening and invite, people of profile, legislators, people. They want people in that room to come and watch it, and so basically to start the conversation, using Maine, using Connecticut, the more progressive states in that particular area of animal law as an example.
Just in terms of where people can see it, it's still quite a young film. I think we finished it fully maybe a couple of months ago. So it's not out yet, but stay tuned on distribution. We'll share more deets on that. And in terms of who I want to see it, I would say the 100 million dog owners in the United States.
So if people are wanting to know more about you all or the film or how they could see it, how can they contact you?
People want to learn more about where they can see the film or organize the screening, for example. They can contact us on our Instagram, which is dog_people_doc, like documentary. And we can be found there. And Tom and I will be sure to get back to you. And as you mentioned, we're organizing screenings across America at the moment, and up to 6 states at the moment, where it's going to be used as a kind of a conversation starter with the local state bars on how to change animal laws in their states.
Can you say that web address one more time?
Yeah. So if people want to get in touch with us, they can get in touch with us on our Instagram, which is dog_people_doc. That's dog_people_doc, like documentary. And Tom and I will be sure to get back to you ASAP.
So I want to thank you both for being on the show today and talking about your film, Dogs Are People Too. I want to close it out with a quote that was in the film that I think hits the nail on the head with how I feel with all the volunteer work I do with animals. And that is, in our relationships with dogs, we see the best and the worst in what it means to be human. And that quote I will remember for a long time. So thank you very much for making the film and for being on the show. This is Tom Kiesche, and you've been listening to The Animal Agenda right here on KPFK 90.7 FM in Los Angeles, or streaming online every Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Our guests this week have been director Hendrik Faller and producer Tom Miller. Very special thanks to producer Marlena Bond and Melanie King. If you have questions, suggestions, or want to know more, write comments at kpfk.org or the Animal Agenda's Facebook page. You can find out more about me through my link tree.